Marcus didn't see the man until the metal edge of the locker slammed against his shoulder. You think hall passes make you special? Officer Keller's voice cut through the corridor like the scrape of rusted steel, loud enough for every student lingering near the math wing to turn their heads. I said stop walking. Are you deaf or just pretending? Marcus froze, his breath hitching as he steadied himself. The morning bell hadn't even finished echoing, but already a small circle of students had formed, quiet, alert, waiting. Keller stepped closer, his boots thudding against the polished floor. Look at me when I talk to you. Marcus lifted his eyes. Sir, I told you, Mrs. Grayson sent me to the bathroom. I have a pass right here. He raised a small yellow slip, but Keller knocked it out of his hand with the back of his knuckles, the paper fluttering to the ground like something filthy. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered. Bro, he didn't even do anything. Keller's jaw flexed. What did I tell you about attitude? Always comes with the quiet ones. You think you're smarter than me? You think you can just wander wherever you want because you got straight A's. Marcus shook his head quickly. No, sir. Then why? Keller leaned down, his face inches from Marcus's, breath hot and sour with morning coffee. Are you still standing like you have a choice? For a heartbeat, Marcus forgot how to breathe. Keller's hand clamped around his upper arm. Hard, fingers digging in, and he yanked Marcus forward, forcing him to stumble. A few students recoiled. A girl raised her phone discreetly. Another boy muttered, Damn! Keller whipped his head toward them. Put the phones away unless you want to join him in the office. No one moved. No one lowered their phones either. Marcus's cheeks burned. Humiliation crawled at the back of his neck like a rising fever. He swallowed thickly. Please, Officer Keller, I'm just trying to go back to class. And I'm trying to teach you some discipline, Keller snapped. Something you clearly don't get at home. Marcus's heart clenched, sharp, unexpected. Sir, quiet. Keller shoved him lightly toward the lockers again. Not hard enough to injure him, but enough to send a message. Enough to humiliate. Enough that the shame stung deeper than the pain. He heard whispers ripple behind him. This is messed up. He didn't do anything. Why is he always targeting? Keller barked. Everyone keep moving, but no one did. They only stepped back, giving him more space to confront the boy in front of them like a spectacle to be watched. Marcus lowered his gaze, wishing, just for a second, that he could dissolve into the linoleum floor. Pick up the pass, Keller ordered. Marcus crouched to retrieve the small paper, his fingers trembling as he reached for it. And then, before he could stand, Keller kicked the paper farther down the hallway. A few students gasped in unison. Marcus froze mid-crouch. Go on, Keller said, folding his arms. Fetch. The word hit harder than the push, harder than the grip. Marcus's throat tightened, humiliation spreading like poison. He stood slowly, refusing to follow the paper. Keller's eyes narrowed. You refusing now? No, sir. Then move. Marcus barely formed a sound before Keller grabbed his arm again, dragging him several steps down the corridor. You kids think rules don't apply to you. That's the real problem. Too much coddling. Officer Keller. A voice called sharply from nearby. Mrs. Belinda Johnson, English teacher, glasses slightly crooked, expression tense. Let the boy go. I saw his pass. He had permission. Keller didn't even look at her. Teacher or not, stay out of this, Belinda. She hesitated like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall was certain. And then she did exactly what she hated herself for. She stepped back, lowered her eyes, said nothing else. Keller smirked as if her silence confirmed something he had always believed, that no one would dare interfere. See that? He said to Marcus. Everyone knows your type always finds trouble. Marcus felt heat burst behind his eyes. Anger, shame, disbelief. That's not fair, he whispered. Fair, Keller scoffed. I'm not here to make things fair. I'm here to keep order. And you're out of order. He pulled Marcus again, harsher this time. Pain shot up Marcus's arm. Sir, please stop. Keller ignored him and marched him through the corridor, dragging him past lockers, past students, past teachers who looked away. Marcus caught glimpses, shocked expressions, hands covering mouths, phones recording. That was the worst part. The audience, being paraded like a criminal, when all he wanted was to return to class. Keller muttered under his breath, "Always the same damn excuses. Think rules don't apply behind them." Mrs. Johnson whispered to herself, guilty and powerless, "I'm sorry, Marcus." Marcus couldn't hear her, but the students did, and the guilt in her voice stayed with them long after. 2 hours earlier, Marcus Hale had walked into Roosevelt High with a backpack full of textbooks, earbuds tucked into his hood, and not a single thought that the day would try to break him. The scent of wet asphalt drifted through the entrance as students hustled in from the morning rain. Marcus always arrived early, partly because his father insisted, partly because he liked the quiet. Charlotte's fall weather had turned the sky a dull gray, but inside the building the hum of voices and slamming lockers created a familiar rhythm. At 15, Marcus was known for being the kind of student teachers admired, polite, quiet, razor smart. He blended in easily. He liked blending in. It was safer that way. "Morning, Marcus," Principal Collins said as she passed him near the office, her tone bright, but her eyes cold in a way she thought students didn't notice. He forced a smile. "Good morning, ma'am." But something about her always made his stomach tighten. Too many times he had overheard her talking about maintaining standards, always when certain students walked past. Once she had stopped him in the hall to remind him the dress code didn't allow hoodies, even though a dozen other students wore them freely. He let it go. He always did. His dad taught him to pick his battles. Still, there were things Marcus picked up. Small things, quiet things, patterns that made the back of his neck prickle. Teachers whispering after a student was suspended. A friend who got attention for disrespect when he barely spoke in class. A rumor that a girl from his biology class transferred schools after being disciplined over something she said she didn't do. Things that didn't add up. Things Marcus didn't have proof for. But he felt them, growing, like cracks in the walls of the building. By fourth period, he was deep in Algebra 2, pencil moving fast across the worksheet. "Marcus," Mrs. Grayson called, soft-spoken and warm. "You can run to the restroom if you need. Just take the pass." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." That should have been the simplest moment of his day. It was normal, routine, safe, until he turned the corner near the science wing and saw Officer Keller leaning against the lockers like he'd been waiting for someone to challenge. "Where do you think you're going?" Keller had barked, and everything unraveled. Now, dragged through the corridor toward the disciplinary room, Marcus fought the tightening in his chest. "Please," he said again, voice cracking despite his effort to sound steady. "You're hurting me." Keller didn't loosen his grip. "You'll be fine. A little lesson never killed anyone. But I didn't do anything." "And that," Keller said, "is what they all say." They reached the doorway of the disciplinary room. Small, windowless, walls yellow with age, a single flickering fluorescent bulb buzzing like a trapped insect. Keller shoved the door open. Inside, Marcus tried to step backward, but Keller's hand dug in deeper. He met Keller's eyes, searching for even a flicker of humanity. There was none, only something cold. Something that saw him not as a kid, but as a problem, a threat, an inconvenience. "You want to walk in," Keller said quietly. "Or do I need to make you?" Marcus swallowed hard and stepped inside. He stood in the stale air, the door half closed. Keller glanced around the empty room. "Hand me your phone." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, that's my—" "Give it." Keller extended his palm. Marcus slowly handed over the phone. Keller smirked. "Good boy." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. In the sudden quiet, Marcus felt his hands tremble. He leaned against the desk, forcing his breath to steady. Then, thinking fast, heart hammering, he pulled his phone back from the desk drawer where Keller had tossed it carelessly during the shove. Seconds. That's all he had. He typed only 3 words. "Dad, need you. Urgent." Then he placed the phone back, exactly where it had been. He exhaled shakily. Somewhere beyond the locked door, footsteps echoed. The engine of the military-grade SUV roared across the wet streets of Charlotte, tires slicing through puddles without hesitation. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Hale hadn't changed out of his uniform. He didn't have time. Combat boots, name tag stitched over the heart, patches bearing his rank and division. The man looked like a machine built for precision. But behind the rigid posture and steel-trap expression was a father unraveling by the second. Marcus's message played on repeat in his mind. "Dad, need you. Urgent." It wasn't like his son to panic. Marcus never used words like that lightly. And that was the part that scared Anthony the most. He had raised his son to be thoughtful, measured, careful. The kind of boy who apologized when it wasn't his fault just to de-escalate. The kind of boy who got nervous if his shoelaces weren't even. If Marcus had sent that text, something had gone very, very wrong. Anthony's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Rain slapped against the windshield in a blur of water and light. He pushed the speed 10 miles over the limit. He didn't care. Roosevelt High appeared in the distance, a brown brick building flanked by tall black gates and a slightly rusted flagpole. The lot was already half full with school buses, parents' cars, and staff vehicles. Anthony didn't slow down. He pulled into the front circle, braking hard, engine still running, stepped out into the rain like a storm contained in a man's frame. Inside the building, the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers passed like static electricity through the hallways. Students huddled in groups, phones hidden but recording, eyes darting toward the front office. Everyone had seen it by now. The video, the dragging, the humiliation, even the teachers. No one said anything out loud, but the silence was thicker than noise. Mrs. Belinda Johnson sat in the faculty lounge, her fingers clenched around a coffee cup she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Her stomach twisted. She kept hearing her own voice in her head from earlier. "Let the boy go." I saw his pass. And then she'd step back, step down, just like everyone else. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. A student, one of her seniors, had sent her the video. In the middle of the hallway, Keller dragging Marcus like he was nothing. Her face went pale. "Jesus," she whispered. "Jesus Christ." At the front door, Anthony pushed past the main doors. The woman at the reception desk, Ms. Krantz, blinked up at him. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't." "Where's my son?" he asked, voice calm but cold, razor sharp. "Excuse me. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Hale," he said, pulling out his military ID with a practiced hand. "My son, Marcus Hale, is being detained on this campus without cause. I received a distress message. I want to see him. Now." Ms. Krantz stared at the ID, then at him, her face blanching as she picked up the phone. Please wait just a moment. That wasn't a request." Principal Margaret Collins appeared moments later, smiling too quickly, lips tight with the kind of tension that came from years of pretending she had control. "Colonel Hale, what a surprise. I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding. Everything is under control." "Where's my son?" Anthony repeated, eyes locked on hers. "He's in the disciplinary room. There was an incident in the hallway. Our school officer was following protocol. Your officer assaulted my son in front of dozens of witnesses," he said flatly. "That is not protocol. I can assure you Marcus was not cooperating. He had a pass from his teacher, and I have 10 videos from students showing what your officer did to him." Her expression twitched. "Colonel Hale, I suggest we move this to my office." "No," Anthony interrupted. "I'm not here for a meeting. I'm here for my son." There was no raising of the voice, no anger in the tone, just authority, pure and undeniable. Collins stepped aside. "Of course. Follow me." The walk through the halls was slow, heavy with eyes. Students peeked out of classrooms. Some followed from behind. Phones back up again. Word spread like fire. His dad is here. The colonel, Marcus's dad. The room was just as Marcus remembered it. Cold, quiet, walls the color of old paper. He sat at a corner desk, arms crossed tight across his chest, phone gone, staring at nothing. The moment the door opened and his father appeared, Marcus shot up. "Dad, I'm here," Anthony said, voice low. "Are you hurt?" "Just my arm," Marcus muttered. "He grabbed me hard, that's all." "Did he hit you?" Marcus hesitated. "No, just He kept pushing and calling me names. Anthony walked over, took his son's arm gently, rolled up the sleeve. There were dark marks already blooming near the bicep. His face didn't move. He just nodded. "We're leaving." "Sir," Collins began, but Anthony raised one hand. "You're done speaking. If you try to stop me, I will have this entire school placed under federal review by sundown. Do I make myself clear?" She shut her mouth. The silence from the hallway deepened. Keller appeared at the far end, arms folded, as if waiting to defend himself. His smirk twitched when he saw Anthony. Anthony didn't wait. He walked straight down the corridor, Marcus at his side. Students moved like water parting for the current. Keller opened his mouth, but Anthony spoke first. "Your badge number." "Excuse me." "Your badge number. Give it. Now." "Sir, I was only doing my job. You laid hands on a child with no justification. I have video from 6 angles. You can either give me your information, or I'll get it from your chain of command when you're on suspension." Keller swallowed. "You don't know what it's like in this building. These kids are children," Anthony snapped. "You're supposed to protect them, not terrorize them." He was disrespectful. He was walking back from the bathroom with a pass. Keller's mouth opened again, but the words died. Something about the colonel's presence had shifted the air. There was no winning this fight. Not today. Not with students filming. Not with eyes in every direction. And certainly not with the military father of the boy you just manhandled staring you down with a calm colder than a sniper's scope. "You'll be hearing from my attorney," Anthony said. Then he turned to his son. "Come on, Marcus." They walked out together, past students lining the walls, past Belinda Johnson, who had tears in her eyes but said nothing, past Margaret Collins, whose face was white with something close to panic. In the parking lot, Anthony unlocked the SUV and let Marcus climb in. But before he got in himself, he turned back to the building. And that's when it began. Phones vibrated in pockets. Airdrops pinged open. Social media feeds lit up. The video, the dragging, the footage from every angle. A dozen versions of the same truth. Anthony stood outside his vehicle, phone in hand, forwarding every clip. First to his lawyer, then to the Department of Education, and finally to the Inspector General's office under the Department of Defense. He wasn't just a parent. He was a man with reach, and he had just been activated. Inside the school, Principal Collins sat behind her desk, watching her own phone light up again and again. Texts from board members, emails from central office, then a call. The name on the screen made her stomach twist. She answered, "Yes." "We've seen the footage," said the voice on the line. "Is it real?" "There's context. We're sending representatives. Today, start preparing your statement." She hung up, her hand shaking. The system she controlled for years, every quiet cover-up, every skewed report, every unfair suspension, was starting to crack. Outside, Anthony climbed into the SUV. Marcus sat quietly, watching the rain streak the windows. "What happens now?" he asked. Anthony looked straight ahead. "Now!" He turned the key in the ignition. The rain hadn't stopped, but inside Roosevelt High, it was no longer the weather making people uncomfortable. It was the silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that settled over the halls like fog, thicker than before, colder too. Teachers passed one another without eye contact. Students whispered in corners, their phones never more than an inch from their hands. Something had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. The video had gone viral. By the time Colonel Hale returned home with Marcus, it had already been picked up by 3 local news stations, a national blog, and 2 civil rights watchdogs. What no one expected, however, was how quickly it would escalate. By evening, Anthony had gathered every recording, every message, every screenshot. With the help of a JAG attorney, an old Army friend, he had filed formal complaints with the Department of Education, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And then he made one phone call to the governor's office. It wasn't a threat. It was a notification. The school would be under federal review by morning. Inside the house, Marcus sat on the edge of the couch, knees pulled to his chest, watching the news replay a muted version of his humiliation. He hadn't said much since they got home. Not from fear. He was past that, but from something deeper. He felt cracked open, exposed. His father sat across from him, silent. The uniform was still on. Anthony hadn't changed yet. Not because he didn't have time, but because something about that uniform grounded him, kept the fury from boiling over. "They treated me like I was nothing," Marcus said finally. His voice didn't waver, but it carried a weight that made Anthony sit forward. "Like I wasn't even a person. Just something the way." Anthony nodded slowly. "You're not nothing. You never have been." "I know," Marcus said, but it didn't matter to them. The next day, Roosevelt High was not the same. 2 unmarked black SUVs parked outside the main entrance. Agents from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights entered through the front doors, badges in hand. They didn't ask permission. They didn't schedule a visit. They came with a list of names and a portable hard drive. Margaret Collins watched them from her office window, her fingers tapping the desk, a bead of sweat at her temple. By mid-morning, several teachers had been pulled into private interviews. Students, too. The investigators were calm, professional, but thorough. They asked for disciplinary records, footage from hallway cameras, copies of internal emails. And when Margaret hesitated, they reminded her that obstruction of a federal investigation was grounds for immediate removal. That's when she knew this was real, not a bad news cycle, not a parent overreacting. This was the beginning of the end. Meanwhile, Anthony was just getting started. He arrived on campus in a dark suit, no longer in uniform, but carrying a presence no one could ignore. He wasn't there to make a scene. He was there to collect the truth, and the truth, he believed, was hidden deep in the records. What he didn't expect was the envelope. A plain manila folder slipped into his hand by a trembling woman as he stood near the staff lounge. "Take it," she whispered. "I can't say anything, but you should look." He opened it later in the SUV, parked under the shadow of a tree in the back lot. Inside, dozens of printed screenshots, student records, dated memos, notes from meetings. What they showed made his blood run cold. A pattern, clear, undeniable, over the past. For years, disciplinary actions at Roosevelt High had followed a very specific, racially skewed pattern. Black students were suspended at nearly 3 times the rate of white students. Notes like defiant, aggressive tone, non-compliant were repeated again and again, often with no documentation of actual violations. And worst of all, many of the referrals came directly from Keller. But the most damning document was a spreadsheet, handwritten, later scanned, a list of names with color highlights. Students of color marked in red. Next to Marcus's name, a note, high GPA, but watch closely. Potential disruptor, if not kept in line. Anthony stared at it for a long time, not in shock, but in silence. That silence burned hotter than rage. Inside the school, students had begun sharing stories. In whispers, in quick glances, in hastily typed group chats. He slammed Jamal into the lockers last year, said it was for skipping class, but he was just 5 minutes late. Remember when Janiyah got detention for attitude? She just asked to use the bathroom. They suspended Malik for loitering during lunch. One by one, the pieces came together. Marcus wasn't the first. He was just the first who had someone powerful enough to expose it. By the end of the week, more documents surfaced. A teacher, anonymously, forwarded an email chain between Principal Collins and several department heads. In it, Collins instructed staff to flag repeated behavioral issues, especially among underperforming or socially disruptive students. And when asked to clarify what disruptive meant, she replied, "You'll know them when you see them." A separate message advised staff to be cautious with certain parents who might escalate things unnecessarily. A list of names followed. Anthony Hales was on it. That's when Anthony called a press conference, not with banners or crowds, just a quiet gathering outside Roosevelt High. Reporters lined up, microphones ready. Marcus stood next to him, not speaking, but standing tall. Anthony didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply read from the documents. "This school," he said, has not failed because of bad kids. It has failed because adults in power have decided which children deserve compassion and which ones deserve punishment. My son has never been in trouble a single day of his life, but because of the color of his skin, he was treated like a threat. That is not a mistake. That is a system, and that system ends now. The video of his speech spread even faster than the original incident. By the next morning, the school board had no choice. Brian Keller was placed on unpaid leave pending a full investigation. Margaret Collins, however, resisted. She stood in front of cameras days later and claimed that everything was being blown out of proportion. That's when the final blow landed. Anthony received a second folder, this one mailed anonymously. Inside were copies of edited student records, handwritten notes in Collins's handwriting, adjusted infractions, suppressed complaints. In one memo, she had explicitly instructed staff to reclassify minor offenses as major ones in order to push certain students into suspension protocols. The manipulation wasn't just passive, it was policy. Anthony delivered the folder to federal agents personally. By Monday morning, Margaret Collins was escorted off school property by district officials. Keller was subpoenaed. Teachers began to speak freely. And students, black, brown, white, started organizing. A new club formed, Roosevelt Student Justice. They met after school in the library, discussing ways to protect each other, to educate each other, to make sure what happened to Marcus would never happen again. On a Wednesday morning, a week after the incident, Marcus returned to school. Heads turned, hallways quieted, not in judgment, but in recognition. He wasn't invisible anymore. Mrs. Johnson met him at the door of his English class, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. "I should have done more." Marcus didn't say it was okay. It wasn't, but he nodded and walked in. The classroom was full. His seat was waiting. And this time, no one would drag him away. There was no bell loud enough to silence what had already been awakened inside Roosevelt High. Not after everything. Not after Marcus. The school moved, but it did not breathe the same. Hushed footsteps replaced idle chatter. Eyes lingered longer. Teachers walked the halls with measured expressions, some alert, others ashamed. Something fundamental had been broken. Trust, maybe. Illusions, definitely. But from that fracture, something else began to grow. It started small. A flyer taped to the stairwell wall. Student rights meeting. Thursday, library, after school. No names. No teachers. Just a message. Then another. Bring your story. By the time Thursday arrived, the library was packed. Dozens of students from all grades, all backgrounds, stood shoulder to shoulder between bookshelves, notebooks in hand, phones silenced. Marcus stood at the back, hands in his pockets, eyes wide. He hadn't started this. He didn't know who had, but it didn't matter. It was happening. A sophomore named Tasha spoke first. She described being marked tardy 5 times in 1 week because her teacher refused to open the door after the bell, even though she had to drop off her little brother at the elementary school next door. A junior named Devin described a time he was searched for suspicious behavior after laughing too loudly in the cafeteria. A senior named Jorge shared how he'd been written up for noncompliance after asking why they read only white authors in English class. The stories came like a flood, each one more specific, more painful, more familiar. Students cried. Others stood frozen, their shame validated by someone else's voice. Marcus didn't speak. Not that day, but he listened, hard. Later that night, as he sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal he wasn't hungry for, Anthony placed a folder in front of him. "They sent the full report," he said, "from the Department of Education." Marcus looked at it, but didn't touch it. What does it say? Everything we knew, everything we suspected, plus more. Anthony sat down. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from work, but the kind that settles in your bones when you've carried something heavy for too long. "Marcus," he said quietly, "they found evidence that over 70 student files were altered under Principal Collins' direction, most of them black students, some Hispanic, a few white kids with IEPs. Records changed, suspensions added. Notes modified to make certain kids look like repeat offenders. It was all about control, not discipline. Control. Marcus blinked slowly. Do you think they'll fix it? Anthony didn't answer right away. They'll try, or say they'll try. But real change? That depends on what we do next. A beat passed. Then Marcus said, I want to go back. I want to graduate there. Anthony studied him. Are you sure? Yeah. Marcus nodded. Because if I don't, then all they'll remember is what they did to me. I want to be remembered for what I did after. At Roosevelt, the investigation didn't just remove people. It revealed them. Mrs. Johnson, who had once stayed silent, was now the most vocal voice on the staff. She worked with a student group, pushed for a new restorative justice program, and volunteered to co-sponsor the newly formed Equity and Inclusion Committee. Other teachers followed, some out of guilt, others out of long-suppressed conviction. But not all reactions were supportive. Some parents, mostly white, mostly from the wealthier corners of Charlotte, filed complaints. They claimed the school was becoming political, that the curriculum was too focused on race, that their children were being made to feel guilty. A few local news outlets picked up the backlash, airing angry sound bites from PTA meetings filled with buzzwords, reverse discrimination, indoctrination, divisive rhetoric. But what they didn't count on, what none of them expected, was the students' response. They organized a walkout, peaceful, coordinated, unified, signs held high. We won't be silent, just because you were. Local media covered it live. Students from other schools began to reach out. It became more than a protest. It became a movement. Margaret Collins, meanwhile, remained silent after her removal. She hired a lawyer and released a carefully worded statement to the press. I have always acted in the best interest of my students. Any inconsistencies in documentation were administrative errors, not intentional bias. But the documents told another story, one she couldn't bury, one she couldn't spin. She had built a fortress of image management and policy manipulation, but it collapsed under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. She had chosen who deserved empathy and who deserved punishment based on the color of their skin. The district moved to revoke her credentials. Keller, too, faced charges, not just for the incident with Marcus, but for a string of past complaints now resurfacing, most of which had been previously resolved quietly, with settlements, non-disclosure agreements, whispers. But now, nothing could be quieted. A week before winter break, Marcus stood in front of his English class, his project presentation day. His voice was calm but steady. His classmates watched with the same mixture of respect and awe usually reserved for leaders and legends. My project is about silence, he said. Not the kind you get when you're alone, but the kind that happens when you're surrounded by people who could speak and don't. We all saw what happened to me in that hallway. Some of you recorded it. Some of you watched. Some teachers walked by and kept walking. But what scared me the most wasn't Keller grabbing me. It was how normal it felt. Like he'd done it before. Like no one was surprised. And I wondered, how many other times it happened? How many other people went through that? And we didn't know, or we knew, but didn't say anything. He took a breath, looked around the room. I'm not mad anymore. I still get scared. But I'm more angry at the silence and the pain. Because silence gives people like him permission. Silence protects systems that shouldn't exist. So he held up a copy of his essay. This is my noise. This is me not being silent anymore. The class was quiet for a long time after he sat down. Then someone clapped. Then another, until the room filled with it. Not like a performance, but like a promise. Later that day, Anthony watched the footage of the presentation. A student had filmed it and sent it to him. He didn't cry, but he smiled, small and proud. Not because his son had survived something horrific, but because he had turned it into something bigger than himself. That night, as father and son sat in the living room with no TV, no distractions, just a soft hum of rain outside again, Marcus said, You think she ever really cared, Principal Collins? Anthony shook his head. She cared about control and appearances. But not you, not kids like you. How do we stop more people like her? "We don't stop people," Anthony said. "We replace them. We outnumber them. And we tell louder truths than their lies." Marcus nodded. He understood. Roosevelt High would never be what it was. Too much had been exposed. Too much had changed. But maybe that was the point. Some things don't need to be restored. They need to be rebuilt. From the inside out. Spring came to Charlotte slowly, like it was cautious to return. The air warmed, but not too fast. The trees bloomed in quiet defiance of everything the winter had tried to bury. At Roosevelt High, the walls had been repainted. New security policies were implemented, clear, firm, transparent. The disciplinary room had been dismantled entirely. The space turned into a student support center with counselors and mediation tables. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus when he walked by the room that once locked him inside and saw two students working on homework together, laughing quietly under the glow of warm light. He didn't stop. He just smiled and kept walking. Graduation was 2 weeks away. He was giving a speech, not because he asked to, but because his peers voted for it. He tried to refuse at first, said he didn't want to be the face of anything. But then a girl he barely knew, someone from his history class, approached him in the hallway and said, "When that happened to you, I stopped feeling invisible. I realized we weren't crazy." That stayed with him. So he agreed. Anthony watched from the kitchen doorway one night as Marcus practiced a speech to himself in front of the mirror. He didn't interrupt. Just watched his son, taller now, steadier, voice stronger than ever, and remembered the morning he had almost lost him, not to violence, but to silence. And now here he was, standing tall, telling his truth out loud. The day of the ceremony arrived with sunlight and soft wind. Families gathered on the football field in folding chairs, wearing sunglasses and school colors. The podium was set. Students lined up, gowns fluttering in the breeze. When Marcus stepped up to speak, the crowd quieted naturally. There was no need for the principal to shush them. Everyone wanted to hear him. He looked over the faces, some familiar, some not, and began. "A year ago, I thought school was just something to survive. You show up, do your work, stay quiet, and hope no one sees you as a problem. But then something happened to me, in front of all of you, and for the first time, I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to be seen, not for what someone feared I might be, but for who I really am." He paused, the breeze carrying the weight of his words across the field. This school used to run on silence, but we changed that. We spoke up. We told the truth, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And because of that, the people after us will walk these halls differently. They won't be alone. He looked toward his father in the crowd. Anthony nodded once, proud. "We're not done yet, but we started something, and that's more than enough for now." The crowd rose to its feet, the applause not just for Marcus, but for the journey, for the resistance, for the promise that schools could be better, that students could be heard, that injustice doesn't win if truth is louder. After the ceremony, people swarmed Marcus, teachers, friends, strangers. He smiled, took photos, accepted their words with humility. But when the crowd faded and the sky turned golden, he and Anthony stood together in silence near the bleachers. "You did it," Anthony said. "We did," Marcus corrected. Anthony put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You changed something permanent today. Don't ever forget that." "I won't." They drove home with the windows down, the warm wind rushing in. No more uniforms. No more locked doors. Just a father and a son moving forward. And somewhere behind them, a school beginning again. Thank you for listening to this story until the end.